We just heard from head coach Zach Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to break down some of the big pieces from that press conference. Zach Taylor speaking out in the NFL owners meetings in Phoenix. The AFC coaches had a breakfast a couple days ago on March 31st, and some Bengals reporters were able to sit down and interview the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Four big topics stood out to me from that interview. The Super Bowl pedigree that the Bengals were able to bring in this offseason. A lot of confidence placed in three rookie picks from the previous year, Shamar Stewart and the two rookie linebackers in Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter. And finally, Joe Burrow playing flag football. Is Zach Taylor okay with it? Is he not? We're going to talk about that and more today on Bengals Daily, part of the Fan Arch Podcast Network. My name is Dave Olson. It's good to be with you. Here's your fun fact for the day. Today, April 2nd, not only my birthday, turning 31, also April 2nd in 2008, Cincinnati broke ground on the banks. So the riverfront area right next to the stadium, combining Paycor Stadium and the Great American Ballpark, all those bars, restaurants, everything out there. If you've ever been walking around in tailgating, well, April 2nd, 2008. So what is that? Oh, God, is that 18 years ago? Wow, they broke ground 18 years ago, and we're reaping the benefits all these years later. One of the great additions to the Cincinnati area, and honestly, the game day experience is all that much better for it. So let's talk about a little bit of what head coach Zach Taylor had to say out in Arizona during the NFL owners meetings. I do want to put a little subtext here. Recently came out that we were not going to be able to hear from Katie Blackburn. Technically one of the owners of the Cincinnati Bengals, does a lot of our front office work. I believe the plan is to hear from her later on this offseason, so I don't think it's completely avoid offseason hearing from this ownership group, but yet again, it's Zach Taylor being put in front of the media when otherwise we might be hearing from the owners during a typical year. So what did Zach Taylor have to say? Well, first and foremost, wanted to heap some praise on two of the big signings for the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason. Of course, talking about Cook and Mafe, and I'll quote Zach Taylor a little bit here before we get into it. He said, and I quote, "I think they walk in and are great additions just in terms of their mindset, their playing ability, the role they're going to play in our defense." Also, going on to say, they come from organizations that have won, and so I think that anytime you can add a recency of winning championships, I think that is good for our locker room, end quote. So, I mean, is this real or is this just coach speak? Well, here's the reality. This is something else Zach Taylor went on to say in this interview. This is something that happened in 2020 to 2021. Not entirely Super Bowl pedigree, but veteran leadership pedigree. Talk about bringing in DJ Reader, Mike Hilton, Awuzie. Those are players that have been there, done that. Veteran players totally transformed the defensive side of the football. And that put the Bengals in back-to-back AFC North title games, one of those two leading to a Super Bowl appearance. So I don't think it's entirely just a talking point. I think a player who is a part of a system that has won a Super Bowl, has more experience than a player who has never been there, never done that. You can really start to split hairs and say, okay, how much did this specific player glean from that? How much did this specific player play a role in those moments? But I do think by and large, Zach Taylor is onto something here. If the voices are loud enough from Cook and Mafe, that's really the question. Bringing in a player who's won a couple Super Bowls or won a Super Bowl or played in a Super Bowl, if that player isn't vocal and transforms and says, hey guys, I see the way things are going on the defensive side of the ball or offense, we're talking about offensive players, but particularly for Cook and Mafe, for their Super Bowl appearances to matter, they've got to be able to call out things they see on our defense, the Bengals defense, when they aren't up to Super Bowl caliber play. So I think that's the big pivot point here. Of course, players who are good enough to win Super Bowls, great to have on your team. Players who are good enough to play and win Super Bowls and are also good enough to transform the mindset of what was a really lackluster defense from last year, That's really where I think the Bengals are going to start to reap their rewards. Of course, Brian Cook with 2 rings, Boye Mafe with 1. Combined, they've been to 4 Super Bowls. Mafe coming off a Super Bowl win just this past year with the Seattle Seahawks. Worth noting that a lot of the rookies, particularly in the last couple of years, have never been to the playoffs in general. This is a team who in college may have had some experience, some players who in college may have had some experience, but at the NFL level, our defense is young with some of the draft picks we've brought in the past few years. And so I think I look at Zach Taylor's quotes around Super Bowl pedigree, and I hinge that on Cook and Mafe's ability to say, hey guys, this is what we did in our previous teams to bring those teams to Super Bowls and to bring those teams to Super Bowl wins. And so, of course, there's some value in what head coach Zach Taylor is saying here. And I think that's another reason for Bengals fans to be optimistic going into 2026. Let's talk about some of the confidence that Taylor is putting on returning players from previous years. I'm gonna have some thoughts on a few of these guys, but let's get into a few of the quotes now. So Shamar Stewart, the first round pick from last year, remember, held out prior to signing his rookie deal, came into the team, got injured after about 280 snaps in year 1. Not ideal, only 1 sack from Shamar Stewart in his first year. Not a whole lot of college production either from Stewart. So this is a front office who's banking on Shamar Stewart making a total turnaround, total player development from this player. So let's talk a little bit about a few of the quotes that we heard from Zach Taylor around Shamar Stewart, also about Boye Mafe and how that might change Stewart's role. Zach Taylor saying, and I quote, "Even if it doesn't show up statistically, just the role that he can play for us, I think, is huge. His development is a priority for us." This is, of course, about Shamar Stewart. "We're not trying to do anything to stunt the growth here." Subtext, that goes without saying. Returning to the quote, "We're trying to do everything we can for him to continue to grow and play a major role for us. Signing Boye really doesn't do anything negatively for Shamar because we still have high expectations for him. If you look at all the great defensive lines that have gone far in the playoffs, they're loaded up front with depth. There are starters, but there are also guys that are going to play 40 to 50 snaps a game." Some of this is a nothing burger to me, and we're going to get to that in our linebacker conversation as well. Of course, a head coach is going to heap praise onto their first overall pick from last year. It's a player who's coming off of an injury. Of course, there's going to be praise and a need for that player to develop, right? You just lost Trey Hendrickson. A lot of folks are kind of writing that off. I can't write off the loss of Trey, even though he was injured for the last half of the year. You're talking about one of the best game and sack finishers in the league, no longer on your defense. Shamar's got to go from essentially 0 to something, right? Even average really helps this team in 2026. So that's what I'm looking for. And of course, that's what Zach Taylor and the rest of the front office are looking for. Unfortunately, it's just one of those picks where I think everyone saw the pick come in and we're all thinking that is the most Bengals pick ever. It's a guy who's a physical freak, has all of this upside. The Bengals trying to outsmart everyone in the draft. And then the dude has like 4 sacks in college, has plenty of pressures, is a productive enough player in other ways in college. I'm not discounting Shamar. I think Shamar has the ability to be a great player in this league. But the conversation is the Bengals have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They're all expensive. We don't need potential, right? We need guys who can even just be average right away. And that's I think, what my thought process would be. Instead of, hey, these guys need a ton of time to develop, but if they can develop, they'll be great. If Shamar can develop, he'll be amazing. I just don't love the idea of banking a team's first-round pick success, Super Bowl hopes, on if this player can develop. We'll talk a little bit about that just general mindset here in a minute as we move on to talk about our linebacker play. Another reason to be optimistic, though, on the defensive line, you're looking at Myles Murphy, who took a big leap in this past year. So basically nothing in 2024 to 5.5 sacks and 41 pressures in 2025. That's a big leap for Myles Murphy, who's finally getting some playing time. I'm expecting another leap for Myles Murphy here in 2026. So that's a reason to be optimistic on the defensive line. And Shamar's only in year 2. Had year 1 cut short due to an injury. And actually, remember, I don't want to be a revisionist here. After week 1, we were all really excited about what we saw from Shamar. Week 2 looked pretty good as well, and then gets injured early on in the season. Had some bad games prior or after a couple of those early season successes, so you can't lose that in the mix either. But there were flashes from Shamar Stewart. I could go on and on about Shamar, but I think Mafe starting to play on that defensive line helps spread some of that pressure off of Stewart, off of Myles Murphy. Mafe, a pass pressure specialist. Let's see if we can get some creative looks in there with Shamar Stewart and Myles Murphy. I wouldn't mind seeing a combination of the 3 of them and getting creative with what we see on the defensive line. This one's going to be an interesting one. So linebacker was a big conversation for Zac Taylor in the interviews that we saw from him out in Arizona. I'll quote him now. Biggest criticism of the offseason so far has been the lack of moves at linebacker. Zac Taylor had this to say. It doesn't mean that we don't prioritize it. It just means that at the moment, the fit has been somewhere else, and so we've identified that and added to it. We are excited about our 2 young guys that played a lot of snaps for us last year, and that development we're going to continue to see. We are counting in a major way on those guys. He went on to say this as well. Again about Myles Murphy. He thought Myles Murphy took a big jump at the end of the year, saying that, of course, you can potentially see that type of growth in our linebackers as well. He reiterated his belief in Demetrius Knight Jr. and Barrett Carter, saying this: I could see long-term value of how this is going to play out for us, and that's still the vision we have for those guys. So Zac Taylor did confirm that veteran linebacker or a draft pick linebacker is still on the table. Logan Wilson retiring now, of course, traded halfway through the season last year. So lack of veteran presence in that linebacker room glaring now. Not just skills wise, but just mindset wise. You're asking a lot of 2 young players who just had a brutal first season in the league. So going into year 2, you're really hoping to see a leap. The final 8 weeks, there was a step forward. I don't know. Let me pull up some stats here. So Barrett Carter, weeks 1 through 9, had a PFF defensive grade in general of 36.2. Terrible. Weeks 11 through 18, 48.8. So 12.5 or so PFF grade increase. 48.8 is still really bad. That's not even close to starter quality. Again, that's replacement tier play. The big leap, though, coming in the run defensive grade from Barrett Carter, going from a 38 to a 66. The missed tackle rate dropping by about 1%. Blitz rate also going down. Al Golden talked about simplifying the defense. That happened. So there was an increase, but it's still not great play out of Barrett Carter. Still not good play. Now, what a lot of people have said is, I don't know so much about Barrett, but I think we see something in Demetrius Knight. Here's why. Weeks 1 through 9, Demetrius Knight had a 33.7 PFF defensive grade. 11 through 18 had a 56.7, a difference of 23 in the PFF grading. So 56.7, below average, but not abysmal, not the worst in the league. Run defensive grade going from a 29 to a 57.5. Absolutely improvements from Demetrius Knight Jr. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the difference in matchups in the last half of the year. We're talking about teams that didn't have much to lose. I'm not writing off all of their improvement. At the end of the day, these are all NFL teams. These are all very capable teams. You're talking about Cardinals. You're talking about Dolphins. You're not talking about the Lions. You're not talking about the Packers. You still get boat raced by the Steelers in the second time we played that team. So there's improvement, yes, but there's got to be an asterisk thrown on that. At the end of the day, I don't know. This quote more than anything concerned me. Now, I'm not sure what Zach Taylor's supposed to say. The reality is, I mean, what else are you going to say? I have confidence in our guys. We hope they develop. Linebackers still on the table. I've been saying that you can't go into a season with Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter as your starting linebackers. I am terrified that we are going to. We did not see enough growth from those two players to lean on them as your starting linebackers, lean on both of them. Maybe Knight. I don't think Carter is there. Some terrible tackling angles, multiple times on the field. The only caveat I think I can throw is you're clearly not giving up on these players. You're clearly keeping them in the building. There has to be at least, in my opinion, at least a competition for playtime. I don't think you can go into the season in 2026 with guaranteed playtime for Knight and Carter. If they go to training camp, we've drafted a player, the Bengals have added maybe an aging veteran in free agency, and Carter and Knight win out that battle, I'm still not excited, but I'm placated a bit. At least at that point, they've had to earn it. I just don't like this idea of not addressing one of the biggest positional needs on the defensive side of the football. Now, maybe a better defensive line helps runs get stopped earlier. First contact happens earlier. Maybe some help in the secondary means the linebackers aren't getting targeted as much over the middle of the field. Those sorts of things can be built in. Unfortunately, I just did not see enough from our two rookie linebackers in year one to say, yep, these are our guys. Let's hinge the middle of the field on these two going into year number two. Zach Taylor, though, providing a vote of confidence. I think linebacker's still on the table. But I'm going to be really scared if we go into the year and Knight and Carter are the two, and it is what it is. I meld a little bit when we say, well, these guys, they got a ton better towards the back half of the year. They absolutely did get better. It is still very early in their career. But it's another situation of hope. Let's hope they keep getting better. We're in the prime of Burrow and Chase and T. We can't hope that players get better and hinge our defensive hopes on players improving. Because what happens if they don't, right? You need to minimize that risk. If they don't improve, you've wasted another year of Burrow and T and Chase. And what happens with Burrow's mentality at that point? You can tell I get fired up about this topic. I've got to move on. We'll talk a little bit more about some linebacker prospects in the draft. Maybe some free agents that are still sitting out there, though. We're talking about bargain bin type pickups here at this point. We'll talk about that more a little bit later on here this week. Our fourth and final topic of the day, a bit of a fun one. Of course, Joe Burrow playing flag football. Here's what Zach Taylor had to say about it. That sounds like a future Zach problem, so we'll let future Zach handle that problem. Going on to say this about Burrow as a competitor. There are a lot of things you can't plan for before you see the game happening. You don't know how it's going to play out. Obviously, you should all know if Joe's going to do something, he's going to go all out and do it. He's going to try to win, and that's why we should love him. We go through it, and fortunately, I was at the Nebraska-Vanderbilt game and pretending like it wasn't happening until it's over. So thankful we got through it, and we're good, and we'll just move forward and get ready for our season now. Burrow agreed with Taylor and said that he shouldn't play defense, immediately started running routes anyway. The reality is, this is in Burrow's DNA. All of us were holding our breath. There were a couple tackles that didn't quite look right. I agree with Taylor here. At the end of the day, Burrow's a competitor. This is who Joe Burrow is. This is who we want him to be. He's going to go all out. He loves the game of football. If this is what Burrow needs to do to continue having fun, then this is what Burrow's got to do to continue having fun, because that'll keep him playing the game of football longer. I'm curious, though. I mean, this is not based in any reality. It just makes me think if there's going to be stipulations placed into contracts, if there's going to be pressure from ownership. Flag football in the Olympics is a big topic of conversation. I wonder how that starts to look moving forward if owners and NFL players that may make those teams are going to start to be protected in a way. Because NFL's the cash cow. Flag football is fun. But it's really just fun for these NFL players to go out and run around and play the game in a different way. So we can all exhale now. Burrow did not get hurt in the flag football competition that we saw him play in. And he will be healthy. Knock on wood. My desk is made out of fake wood, so hopefully it worked out. Will be healthy for the start of the 2026 offseason. Thank goodness we got through that one, meaning Joe Burrow and his flag football escapades. We have got a lot of offseason still to go. I'm going to look at the free agency moves the Bengals did take this week. We're going to start doing some mock drafts. We'll talk a little bit going into next week about some of the prime targets for the Bengals in the upcoming draft. Because there are a lot of things that could happen. The worst case scenario is all these great defensive targets are off the table. Can you take someone like Jeremiah Love? Are you forced into taking a defensive player? Most people would probably say yes. We'll dive into all that and more tomorrow and on next week's episodes of Bengals Daily, part of the Fan Arch Podcast Network. I've been Dave Olson. Hoo day. We'll see you soon.